The old farmhouse felt like a ship in a storm. The wind wasn't just blowing. It was howling, pushing against the walls and making the windows rattle in their frames. Rain came down in thick sheets, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and green. Inside, the man was finishing his dinner. He was a mechanic, a person who spent his days with his hands, fixing things that were broken. His name was Leo, and at 47, he was most comfortable in the quiet company of engines. His house was simple and a little lonely since his dog had passed away a few months before. The silence was usually his friend, but tonight, the storm was filling it with noise. He washed his single plate and fork, wiped down the small kitchen table, and thought about going to bed early. The storm meant he probably wouldn't have many customers at his repair shop in the morning anyway. He stood by the window, watching the rain. His farm wasn't big, just a few fields and a large barn where he kept his tools and worked on bigger projects. It was a peaceful life, a life he had built for himself after years of working for other people in noisy, crowded city garages. Out here, the only thing that needed him was the land and the broken-down cars people brought him. He was about to turn away from the window when it happened. It was a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the crack of thunder or the groan of a tree branch. It was a harsh, terrible noise. The sound of metal screaming as it was torn apart, followed by the unmistakable crunch of glass breaking into a million pieces. It was close, too close. His body reacted before his mind could even fully understand what he had heard. His heart gave a hard, painful thump in his chest. Someone was in trouble. He didn't stop to put on proper shoes. He just grabbed the big, heavy flashlight he kept by the door and an old jacket that was hanging on a hook. He yanked the door open and the storm rushed in, spraying cold rain into his face. He pushed the door shut behind him and started to run. His boots sank into the soft, wet earth of his driveway, splashing through puddles that were already forming. The rain soaked through his jeans instantly, feeling like ice against his skin. He pointed the flashlight beam ahead, but the rain was so heavy it just lit up a wall of water. He ran towards the road, his breath coming out in white puffs in the chilly air. "Hello?" he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. He ran along the edge of the road, his flashlight beam dancing across the wet asphalt. And then he saw it. Just a little way down, the wooden fence that marked the edge of his property was smashed to pieces. His beam followed the path of destruction into the field beyond, and there it was. A car. A small blue sedan was sitting at a crazy angle, its front end completely wrapped around the thick, unmoving trunk of an old oak tree. The front of the car was crushed like a soda can. For a second, everything was still except for the pounding rain. Then he saw a wisp of smoke, or maybe it was steam, curling out from the mangled hood. His stomach dropped. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, his fingers suddenly clumsy and thick. He finally got it out, the screen wet with rain, and managed to press the buttons for 911. 911? What's your emergency? A calm voice asked. My road. There's been a crash. A car hit a tree on Miller's Creek Road, right near my farm. He yelled into the phone, trying to be heard over the storm. He gave his address, his eyes locked on the wrecked car. The dispatcher told him help was on the way, but he knew it would take time. Out here, everything took time. He ran towards the car, the beam of his flashlight shaking in his hand. The smoke was getting darker now, and then he saw a flicker of orange. It was small at first, a little tongue of fire licking out from under the crumpled hood. Then it grew, feeding on something leaking from the engine. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through him. He had to see if anyone was inside. Hello, can you hear me? He shouted as he got closer. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of the fire starting to crackle and the rain hissing as it hit the hot metal. Then he heard it, a small, weak cry. It was the sound of a child. He rushed to the side of the car and shone his flashlight through the window. The glass was webbed with cracks, but he could see inside. In the back seat, strapped into two little car seats, were two small girls. They looked identical, twins. One had her eyes squeezed shut, screaming a high, terrified scream. The other was just staring straight ahead, her eyes wide and shocked, not making a sound. They were both so small, so helpless. In the front seat, a woman was slumped over the steering wheel. The airbag had gone off, but she wasn't moving. The sight of the fire reflected in the girl's wide, frightened eyes broke through his own fear. He had to get them out. Now, the sight of the fire snapped something inside him. The panic was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was pushed down by a wave of pure, single-minded purpose. He had to get those children out. He yanked on the rear car door handle. It didn't move. It was jammed shut, the metal frame bent and twisted from the force of hitting the tree. He pulled again, putting all his strength into it, his boots slipping in the wet grass. Nothing. The door was sealed tight. He moved to the front passenger door, his heart hammering against his ribs. That one was also crumpled and wouldn't budge. The orange glow from the engine was getting brighter, the flickers turning into a steady flame. The air started to smell different. The clean scent of rain was being overpowered by the ugly stink of burning plastic and something sharper, like gasoline. The little girl who was screaming cried out again, a raw, scared sound that cut through the storm louder than the thunder. The sound went straight to his heart. He couldn't fail them. He wouldn't. His mind, usually so good at figuring out how things worked, raced. He needed a tool, something to pry with. He remembered the heavy tire iron lying in the bed of his pickup truck, not 50 yards away. He had used it just that afternoon to change a flat. "Don't be scared. I'm coming back. I promise," he yelled to the children. Though he didn't know if they could understand him, he turned and ran back towards the road, his legs feeling heavy and slow, as if he were running through a nightmare. Every second felt like an hour. He scrambled up the slight embankment, his wet hands slipping on the grass. He reached his truck, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The tire iron was there, cold and solid in his hand. The weight of it felt good. It felt like a chance. He sprinted back to the wreck, the metal bar clutched tightly. The fire was worse now. It had spread from under the hood to the dashboard inside the car. The flames cast a dancing, terrifying light on the inside of the windshield. He could feel the heat on his face, a dry, aggressive warmth that fought against the cool rain. He didn't have time for the doors. He went straight to the back window. It was already shattered, but sharp, jagged pieces of glass still clung to the frame. "Close your eyes. Close your eyes, babies," he shouted, hoping they would listen. He swung the tire iron, careful to aim away from the little girls. He knocked the remaining glass inward, clearing a space big enough for him to reach through. The heat from the front of the car was intensifying, and a new wave of thick, black smoke started to pour from the vents, filling the inside of the car. He dropped the tire iron and leaned in through the broken window. The little girl who was screaming flinched away from him, her cries becoming even more frantic. "It's okay. It's okay. I'm here to help," he said, trying to make his voice as soft and calm as he could. Even though he felt anything but calm, his fingers found the buckle of her car seat. It was a complicated plastic clip, and his big, work-roughened hands felt clumsy. He fumbled with it, his heart sinking. The smoke was getting thicker, making him cough. He could hear the fire crackling and popping, eating its way closer. "Come on, come on," he whispered to himself, his fingers trembling. Then he found the release button. He pressed it, and the buckle came apart with a click. He reached in and gathered the little girl into his arms. She was so small, so light. She kicked and struggled, scared of the stranger covered in rain and smoke. He pulled her out through the window, shielding her face from the broken glass with his body. He carried her, running as fast as he could, away from the burning car. He didn't stop until he was a good 30 yards away, in the wet grass of his field. He shrugged out of his wet jacket, laid it on the ground, and placed the crying child on it. "You're safe now. You're safe. I have to get your sister," he said to her. Though she was too terrified to understand, he turned and ran back. The run back to the car felt even longer, even harder. The entire front half of the vehicle was now engulfed in flames. The fire was licking at the roof, and the smoke was a black pillar rising into the rainy sky. He leaned back into the broken window. The second little girl was still just staring, silent and frozen. Her seat was on the driver's side, closer to the fire. He could feel the intense heat on his right arm as he reached across to her buckle. This one was harder. The plastic was warm to the touch. His fingers slipped. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus, to block out the sound of the fire and the smell of the smoke. He found the button and pressed. Nothing happened. It was stuck. Panic surged in his chest. He pressed again, harder, jiggling the buckle. He put all his strength into his thumb. Finally, with a sickening crack, it released and he pulled the little girl out. She was limp in his arms, her head lolling back. A terrible thought, cold and sharp, stabbed through him. Was he too late? He clutched her to his chest, her small body feeling frighteningly still, and stumbled away from the inferno. He laid her down gently next to her sister on his jacket. He put 2 fingers on her tiny neck, feeling for a pulse. For a terrifying moment, he felt nothing. Then, a weak, fluttering beat touched his fingertips. At the same time, the little girl shuddered and let out a small, choked cough. She was alive. Relief washed over him so powerfully his knees felt weak. He looked back at the car. The fire had reached the front seats. The woman inside was now completely surrounded by flames. The sight filled him with a horrible, helpless grief. He had saved 2, but he couldn't save them all. He stood there, his body trembling from exhaustion and shock. The 2 little girls huddled at his feet, one crying, one coughing weakly. He was their only shelter in the storm. And then, cutting through the roar of the fire, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant, rising wail of sirens. Help was almost here, but for the woman in the car, he knew with a sickening certainty, it was already too late. The sound of the sirens grew from a faint whine to a loud, screaming promise of help. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, painting the rainy scene in bursts of color. The mechanic stood between the 2 little girls and the burning car, a trembling shield. He couldn't take his eyes off the wreck. The fire was now a roaring beast, completely swallowing the front of the car. The heat was so intense he could feel it from where he stood. Any last, faint hope he had for the woman inside was extinguished. A deep, heavy sadness settled in his chest. The first police car skidded to a stop on the road, followed closely by a fire truck and an ambulance. The quiet field was suddenly full of noise and movement. Men and women in uniform rushed towards him. A paramedic, a woman with a kind but serious face, ran up to him. "Are you the one who called it in?" she asked, her eyes quickly moving from him to the girls on the ground. He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. She knelt down by the children, her voice soft and reassuring. "Hello, sweethearts. We're here to help you now." She and her partner started checking the girls, talking to them in calm, gentle tones. The little girl who had been screaming had quieted to a whimper, exhausted. The other one was still too quiet, her eyes wide and unblinking. A firefighter in a heavy, protective coat approached him. "Sir, did you see anyone else in the vehicle?" He finally found his voice, but it was rough and shaky. "A woman, in the front seat. She didn't move. I couldn't. The fire." He couldn't finish the sentence. He just gestured helplessly towards the blaze, which the other firefighters were now attacking with hoses, the water turning to great clouds of steam. The firefighter put a firm hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could. You got these 2 out. You're a hero." The word hero felt wrong. Felt like a heavy coat that didn't fit him. He didn't feel brave. He felt sick and shaky and sad. He watched as the paramedics carefully placed the 2 girls on stretchers, wrapping them in warm blankets. They were so small on those big stretchers. They looked like broken dolls. A police officer came over, a small notebook in his hand. His uniform was getting soaked, but he didn't seem to notice. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" "From the beginning." So he did. He told the officer about the sound of the crash, about running out into the storm, about seeing the fire, and hearing the children cry. He described using the tire iron and pulling the girls from the back window. The words tumbled out, the story feeling both real and like a bad dream. As he spoke, he kept looking over at the burning car. The firefighters had put out most of the flames, and now it was just a black, smoking shell. The reality of what was inside made his stomach twist. After he finished his story, the officer thanked him and walked away to talk to the firefighters. The mechanic was left standing alone in the rain. The adrenaline that had been powering him was gone, and in its place was a deep, bone-tired exhaustion. He was shivering, his wet clothes clinging to his skin like a cold second layer. He saw the paramedics starting to carry the stretchers towards the waiting ambulance. One of the little girls, the one who had been so quiet, suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes scanned the chaotic scene until they found him. She looked right at him. She didn't smile or cry. She just looked, her gaze steady and serious. Then, she was lifted into the ambulance, and the doors closed. That look, from that tiny, pale face, would stay with him for a long time. Someone handed him a rough, gray blanket. He wrapped it around his shoulders, but it didn't stop the chill he felt inside. He answered a few more questions from different people, his answers becoming shorter, his voice quieter. All he wanted was to go home. Finally, after what felt like hours, the activity started to die down. The ambulance drove away, its siren off now, taking the two little girls to the hospital. The fire truck packed up its hoses. The police officers finished their measurements and their notes. One of the officers offered him a ride home, but he shook his head. "I'm just right there," he said, pointing towards his farmhouse. Its lights a warm, blurry glow through the rain. He walked back alone, his feet dragging through the mud. The storm was finally passing, the rain softening to a drizzle. He pushed his front door open and the quiet of the house enveloped him. It was the same quiet as before, but now it felt different. It felt heavy and loud with the memory of the night that he stood in his kitchen. The same kitchen where he had washed his plate just a few hours ago. Felt like a lifetime had passed. He could still smell the smoke in his clothes, in his hair. He could still see the orange flames and the wide, frightened eyes of the children. He sat down at the small table, the blanket still around him. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had been in the right place at the wrong time, or maybe the wrong place at the right time. He had saved 2 lives, but he had also witnessed a death. The weight of both those things pressed down on him. He put his head in his hands and sat there for a long, long time, listening to the quiet drip of water from the roof and the echo of a little girl's cry in his mind. The night was over, but he knew the memory of it was just beginning. The first light of morning came slowly, painting the sky a pale, watery gray. The mechanic had not slept. He had sat at his kitchen table for most of the night, staring at the wall. When the room grew too dark, he didn't bother to turn on a light. He just sat in the darkness, wrapped in the rough blanket, replaying everything in his head. The sound of the crash, the sight of the fire, the feeling of the little girls, one struggling, one so frighteningly still, in his arms. The awful, helpless feeling of watching the flames take over the car. He finally got up when the sun started to peek through the clouds. His body ached everywhere. His arms and shoulders were sore from pulling and carrying. His hands had small cuts from the broken glass. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the heavy feeling in his heart. He made a pot of coffee, the strong smell filling the small kitchen. He poured a cup, his hands still not quite steady. The hot liquid felt good going down, but it couldn't warm the cold spot inside him. He walked out onto his front porch, leaning against the wooden post. The air was clean and fresh after the storm. The world looked peaceful and quiet. His fields stretched out, wet and green. It was the same view he saw every morning, but today it felt different. It felt like the calm after a battle. He stood there for a long time, just sipping his coffee and trying to quiet his mind. He thought about the little girls. Were they okay? Were they scared and alone in a hospital? He hoped someone kind was with them. He hoped they weren't in too much pain. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the sound at first. It started as a low, distant thrum, like a far-off lawnmower. But it didn't go away. It got louder and louder. He looked up, his brow furrowed. What was that? It didn't sound like a tractor. It was deeper, more powerful. Then he saw it. A helicopter. It was flying low, coming from the direction of the city. It was heading straight for his farm. His first confused thought was that it was a medical helicopter, maybe heading to the hospital. But it was flying too low, and it was getting closer. Much closer. As he watched, the helicopter slowed down and then stopped, hanging right in the air over his fields. The noise was deafening now. The powerful downdraft from its blades whipped the tall grass in his fields into circles, like invisible giants were stomping in circles. The peaceful morning was shattered. Before he could even process what was happening, a second helicopter appeared, then a third. Soon, the sky above his small farm was filled with them. They were different sizes and colors, and he could see the big letters of news stations painted on their sides. They circled his property like a swarm of giant, noisy insects. He could see the dark shapes of cameras pointed down, their lenses looking right at him, right at his house, right at the field where the crash had happened. His heart started to pound again, a frantic, panicked rhythm. What was this? Why were they here? This was his home, his quiet place. This was the last thing he wanted. He felt exposed like an animal in a zoo. He wanted to shout at them to go away, to leave him alone. But his voice would be lost in the incredible noise. He stood frozen on his porch, clutching his coffee mug, staring up at the chaotic sky. This was a nightmare of a different kind. Last night was fire and rain and a desperate race against time. This was an invasion. This was noise and staring eyes and a complete loss of the peace he valued so much. He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. Didn't they understand what had happened here? A woman had died. Children had been traumatized. This wasn't a show. This was a tragedy. His field was a place of sadness, not a spectacle for the news. Just as he was about to go back inside, to hide from the noise and the eyes, he saw something else. A car. A long, black, very expensive-looking car was moving slowly down his gravel driveway. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't a news van. It was the kind of car he only saw in movies, the kind that carried very important, very powerful people. The car came to a smooth, quiet stop in front of his house. The noise from the helicopters was still overwhelming, a constant thunder from above. The front doors opened and two men stepped out. They were both tall and dressed in dark, perfectly fitted suits. They looked completely out of place on his dusty gravel driveway. They didn't look up at the helicopters. They didn't seem to notice the noise. Their attention was focused only on him. The two men walked towards his porch. They moved with a calm, confident purpose. The older of the two men looked at him. His face was serious, but not unkind. The mechanic stood his ground, the coffee mug still in his hand, his heart thumping wildly in his chest. He had no idea who these men were or what they wanted. But as they walked towards him, he knew with a strange certainty that the quiet life he knew was over. The events of last night had reached out and pulled him into a world he didn't understand, and it had arrived in a long, black car. The two men reached the bottom of the porch steps. The mechanic didn't move. He just stood there, feeling the rough wood of the porch under his worn boots. He felt small and messy in his old clothes, facing these two men who looked like they had just stepped out of a boardroom. The older man spoke. His voice was calm and clear, and he somehow made himself heard over the constant thunder of the helicopters circling above. "Are you the man who was at the crash last night?" he asked. The mechanic just nodded, his throat too dry to speak. The man's expression softened just a little. "My name is not important. We are here on behalf of the girl's grandfather." The mechanic finally found his voice, came out as a rough whisper. Are the girls okay?" "The girls are safe," the man said, and the mechanic felt a wave of relief so strong his knees felt weak for a second. "They are at the hospital. They are frightened, but the doctors say they will recover physically. Thanks to you." The man looked around at the helicopters, his mouth a thin line of disapproval. "As you can see, the story has become public. The media, they are like sharks. They smell a story and they cannot leave it alone. The girl's grandfather, however, does not wish for this circus. He wishes to protect his family." The mechanic was confused. "I don't understand. Who is their grandfather?" The older man reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a simple, thick white card. He walked up the 2 steps and held it out. The mechanic looked at it. He had to wipe his hand on his pants before he took it, afraid his palm was still dirty. The card felt heavy and expensive. There was no fancy design, just a name. A single, powerful name. It was a name everyone knew. It was the name you saw on skyscrapers in the city, on the sides of ships, on the news when big business deals happened. This man wasn't just rich. He was one of the richest, most powerful men in the world. A man who valued his privacy above all else. A man who was almost like a ghost. A name everyone knew but a face almost no one had seen. The mechanic stared at the card, his mind reeling. The woman in the car. She was this man's daughter. Those 2 little girls were his granddaughters. The weight of it all came crashing down on him. It was too big to understand. The man in the suit seemed to understand his shock. He gave him a moment before he continued. The family was traveling discreetly. Their security car was separated in the storm. It was a tragic accident. He paused, and his voice became even more quiet and serious. Mr. Vassos has been at the hospital all night. He has not left his granddaughter's side. He knows every detail of what you did. He knows you pulled his grandchildren from the burning car. He also knows. He knows that you tried to save his daughter. The man looked him directly in the eye. He wanted us to come here, to find you, to thank you personally for the lives of his grandchildren. The media, he said, glancing up at the noisy sky again. They are here for the drama, but we are here for him, for his gratitude. The mechanic looked from the card in his hand to the man's face. He thought about the billionaire in a hospital room, holding the hands of his 2 small granddaughters. He thought about the terrible grief he must be feeling, losing his daughter. In that moment, the man wasn't a powerful billionaire. He was just a grandfather, a father. A man broken by the same tragedy the mechanic had witnessed. He wasn't thinking about money or reward. He was thinking about that quiet, serious look the little girl had given him before the ambulance doors closed. He doesn't need to thank me, the mechanic said, his voice low and sincere. Anyone would have done it. The man in the suit gave a small, sad smile. But everyone did not, sir. You did. In our experience, true bravery is not common. It is rare. The 2 men nodded to him, a gesture of deep respect. Then they turned and walked back to the long black car. They got in, and the car moved slowly back down his driveway, as smooth and quiet as it had arrived. The mechanic was left alone on his porch. The helicopters were still there, circling, their cameras still rolling. But he didn't look up at them anymore. He looked down at the simple white card in his hand that he had woken up feeling like the world had ended. He had felt the heavy weight of death and failure. But now, knowing the girls were safe, knowing that their grandfather, a man who had lost so much, had taken a moment to send thanks, that weight changed. It didn't disappear, but it became different. He was still just a mechanic. He still lived on his quiet farm. But he knew his life was changed. Not because of the helicopters or the powerful men in suits, but because he had been part of something huge, something tragic, and something beautiful at the same time. He had been a point of light in a very dark night for a family he had never known. He took a deep breath of the morning air, now filled with the smell of turned earth and the noise of the machines above. He knew the helicopters would leave eventually. The news would move on to the next big story. But for him and for that family, the story would continue. It would continue in the lives of 2 little girls who had survived. And as he stood there, he made a quiet promise to himself to remember that, above all else, he had helped 2 children live. And no amount of noise in the sky could ever take that away.